If you've been considering a Fender offset, then you've clicked on the right video. I'm going to be taking a look at 3 of the most famous models, seeing what makes them unique so you can make the right choice. So it's maybe safe to assume that you already know what a Fender offset guitar is, but to put it in its most simplest terms, an offset Fender refers to a few of their guitars that have this slightly offset body. The ones that we're going to be talking about today is the one in my lap, which is a Jazzmaster. I've also got a Mustang and a Jaguar, which in my time being in the shop selling guitars to very, very happy customers, these are the 3 that are, I would say, are the most popular. Now, there are a few extras in the Fender catalogue, but these are the kind of 3 main ones that I particularly want to focus on today. Now, I'm not going to be going into, proper deep spec detail and a history of offsets. There's plenty other videos that go into that deep dive of them. But what I'm going to be looking at with these 3 guitars are what kind of makes each of them unique, what they share across each of these guitars, and maybe some certain genres of music that some are suited to maybe a little bit more than others. Again, to kind of help you make the right choice if you have considered one of these guitars. So if you do want to skip to a certain portion of the video, it has been split up into chapters. You can check the timeline just below. But let's just kick off with the one that's in my lap, and that's the Jazzmaster. So in my opinion, the Fender Jazzmaster is, I would call it the flagship offset of the Fender catalogue. I think some people would maybe disagree and say something maybe like the Jaguar is, but I think in terms of one of their offset guitars, the Jazzmaster is, it's not only one of the most popular ones, and I've maybe sold this out of most of them to customers, but in my opinion, it's the one that is the most flexible, because this guitar, it does a few sounds that I think Fender fans are very, very familiar with, while still doing some pretty unique things with its pretty unique control setup, with the bridge and the trem system, which is I think that's one of the things that really attracts people to this guitar in particular. But we'll get into that in a little bit more detail when I get to it, because what I want to start with is probably the most obvious thing when it comes with these guitars, and that's going to be the sounds that you can get from the pickups. So with the Jazzmaster, and I'm going to explain kind of maybe one of the most sort of one of the most frequently asked questions from customers in this store, and that certainly, it comes across from somebody who hasn't tried one of these kind of guitars before, and it's to do with the switching system on these guitars. And actually, they are shared across on the Jaguar as well. There's some slight different things, particularly with the switches on that guy there, but the Jazzmaster and the Jaguar kind of share one of the key features with, and that is known as the rhythm circuit. So if we're looking at the face of this guitar, this particular model here is a Ventera 2 50s Jazzmaster there. Forgot that's the first era that these were invented in. So this has got a kind of quite a vintage feel to it, but you can get, American professional models, there's custom shop models, there's even Squiers and everything. That's one of the kind of cool things that Fender have been doing recently, is there is accessibility across the board. So more than likely, if there's another Jazzmaster that you're looking at, like say a classic vibe, it will be set up in exactly the same sort of way as this. But we're looking at the controls and the pickups particularly of this guitar here. You've got these 2 big, we'll call them soap bars just now, but particularly like a lot of people I can see getting kind of confused with these, because they look like P90 pickups, which you'll see on like Les Pauls and some other guitars like that. But these are actually specifically Jazzmaster pickups. That's what kind of a lot of people will refer to these as. And they're just, I kind of just like to tell people that they're single coils in a big housing, because they still have that sort of bite and that sort of attack that you would expect from, you know, like a Fender single coil sound. So if I'll cycle through a couple of sounds with the three-way selector here. The easy way to obviously kind of see what this is doing as well. So when it's pushed back, you're on your bridge. When you're in the middle, you're on both pickups there. And when you're at the position facing that way, you're on your neck. So if we're going to start just with the bridge. Even just with those three pickup selections there, you're, in my opinion, certainly, you're getting the kind of full breadth of the Fender tone. That bridge pickup there, it's giving you that kind of spiky bridge Stratocaster or Telecaster sort of sound. The middle position is giving you that kind of glassy sort of, you know, airy tone that maybe people like from that fourth and second position on a Strat, or even the kind of middle position on a Tele. And then that neck pickup is, it's just an extra level of warmth that you maybe don't get with, say, something like a Strat or a Telecaster, which certainly, you know, combining that with, like, say, your tone knob, you know, we can just play that with that fill there. And then if you roll it down, you're getting into very kind of jazzy territory, which, I mean, that's the reason why the Jazzmaster was invented. Maybe it didn't stay like that, but it can certainly do those sort of sounds if you need it. Which is maybe kind of, you're getting into a little bit of kind of muddy territory there, but there's a lot of scope. That was me just turning down the tone all of the way there. Now, where I see a lot of people getting a little bit more confused is when it comes to this little button up here. Again, this is kind of shared on the Jaguar as well, which I'll touch on just to kind of reiterate, especially if for anyone who's maybe skipped through that section. But what this does is, in a nutshell, is when it is down facing this panel here, so your master volume, your master tone, your three-way selector, that's when you have that part of the guitar initiated. But when you flick it up, I'll actually let you hear it before describing exactly what's going on. So this is it just right down there. So what this is doing is, in a nutshell, when you flick this up, it then deactivates all of your controls here. So you'll notice that that master volume isn't doing anything anymore. What it'll switch to is these roller sort of knobs here, or just wheels really, I guess you would call these. This is now your master volume. And then this is your tone. Because this is switching you just to your neck pickup here, and it's giving you a much warmer, it's giving you a much sort of darker tone, which kind of the intention with the Jazzmaster was to be able to get a lot of those jazzy tones. But I think we all know this kind of guitar from shoegaze, from surf rocks, from any sort of alternative rock. Maybe people don't assume this with jazz in any sort of way, despite it being in the name. You do see a lot of people covering this up, because what you'll find is maybe when you're strumming, and this is maybe one of the slight cons about the Jazzmaster, and I will touch again on this with the Jaguar. But if you're quite a heavy player and you're strumming quite a lot, you can tend to maybe catch that switch, and then all of a sudden your tone has shifted to this kind of much muddier and darker sound, especially if you're on any sort of distortion. But if you do plan on using this, it's a very cool tool, especially for you to switch immediately to another sound. Like say you've got like a fuzz or something, like some big distortion on that. It can just give you a slightly different sort of tone, because even I'll put on my distortion here. This is another slight maybe con of these guitars as well, as they can get quite noisy when you do turn on a distortion. So I'll put on my full sound here. So, you know, depending if you do need that or not, that's just a cool option, especially, you know, if you're in the studio or anything like that and you need just a slightly different sound, but you don't want to change your entire rig. That's all just built into the one guitar. And of course, as I said, kind of mentioned with like, you know, recording and all that sort of stuff, it just gives you everything within the one guitar, which is a big positive for me. You don't need to do so many changes to get a slightly different tone. Now, when we're looking at the actual construction of the Jazzmaster, it has that offset body shape. It's very, very comfy. It does have a nice kind of tummy cut out the back there. It has the same sort of arm contour as a Strat, and even kind of like balance wise as well. It's, you know, it is a little bit kind of neck heavy just because you're not having that kind of bottom horn out there just to give it a little bit of balance, but certainly, you know, sitting with it on my lap here, it's not uncomfortable. It's really, really nice to play. Now, despite it having, you know, a kind of like, it looks like it's a much kind of longer scale guitar. This is just your standard 25.5-inch scale length as you would get with any other Fender. It just feels just that little bit bigger because the body is a little bit bigger, certainly compared to like a Strat or Tele or something like that. And what a lot of people really like is that trem arm system that I mentioned earlier as well. It's quite a unique trem arm that it's more of a, you know, the actual construction of this, I don't really need to get into that much. But essentially what it is there's a floating plate underneath this here. So it does have a kind of a much smoother sort of action and a bit of a kind of smoother bounce back than you would maybe expect on something like a Strat. And I think that's why you see a lot of people using these for like shoegaze music, particularly if you're a big fan of like My Bloody Valentine or something like that. Kevin Shields is a huge Jazzmaster guy, and even bands like Superheaven and stuff like that, which are a bit more modern, are using these kind of guitars just for that wobbly goodness from the trem arm there. And I'll even just sort of let you hear how it sounds as well. So obviously for any just kind of vibrato that you want to throw on anything, it's absolutely superb for this. But where a lot of the fun comes in, and certainly where a lot of players have adopted this in, is actually sticking on a bunch of reverb and delay, a bunch of distortion. I'm even going to throw in a chorus on here just because it's really fun. And you get a lot of that kind of wavy, sort of shoegazy sort of sound. Again, very My Bloody Valentine. There's a bunch of new bands doing it these days as well. But that's what this sounds like. by no means subtle in any way with that. You're meant to be kind of like waving in and out of the pitch, you know, for chords and stuff, especially if you're incorporating a lot of open strings, and certainly if you're doing these big kind of strummy like chords. But it is good because the trem arm is that bit longer. You're not going to struggle to kind of keep a hold of it while you are strumming as well. Now, a little piece that I kind of want to touch on, and this is particularly just with older style Jazzmaster, you know, replicas or the Ventera 2s or that kind of, you know, harkening back to their first years, and that's to do with the bridge. Now, the Jazzmaster and the Jaguar bridge and the kind of offset bridge itself, this is nothing new. It's this kind of, you know, 6 saddles on there. You can adjust each height of each. You can adjust the intonation of each as well. But what you find is that on the old style ones is that there's these notches in them. You know, there's maybe about kind of 4 to 5 positions where a string can sit. And they're not particularly deep, so certainly it gives it quite a unique sound and certainly quite a unique sort of aesthetic to it as well. But if you're in any sort of way a modern style player who is maybe doing kind of bigger chords, or you even a slightly harder style like player that really likes to dig into their instrument, what I find with this bridge is that the strings can actually slip a little bit and they'll change their position within the bridge. What that'll then do is it'll change the position on your neck there as well. And I've actually found a couple of times from playing a style of bridge like this is that it'll slip into a position and then you're going to just end up with like a kind of like this snappy sort of sound because it has moved in between the saddles there. Now that is a super, super easy mod. All it takes is just another kind of bridge called a Mustang bridge, which again we'll touch on a little bit later as well. You find that's kind of one of the very first few things that a lot of Jazzmaster players will do. And even with that as well, you know, a lot of them will actually come already pre-installed with that bridge, so worth kind of keeping in mind. Now I have touched on a few slightly different genres and stuff like that, but there is no, you know, saying that you can't do everything that you need to do on a Jazzmaster. You know, even if this just is going to be your main guitar, you can do lead stuff on it, you can do rhythm stuff on it, especially if you are a big fan of those Fender tones. And other than that, it is just a really, really quite cool guitar to play. I think anybody who is into Jazzmasters is always really, really enjoying them, especially anybody who is a fan of anybody who, you know, is quite famous for one of these. I've mentioned Kevin Shields before as well. The next guitar we're going to be moving on to is a very, very famous model as well, which is actually, it's kind of championed by Johnny Marr and certainly is associated with him, and that's the Jaguar. So the very first thing with the Jaguar, I mentioned this when I was talking about the Jazzmaster as well, is that it has the same type of body. It's a Fender offset shape there. It has the same bridge. It also has the same rhythm circuit that is built into there as well. So even just to hear how that sounds, I'm going to go with my neck pickup, and I'm just going to change over to that very, very quickly. I would say that's probably got a bit more of a dramatic difference than the Jazzmaster, just because that neck pickup on the Jazzmaster itself I think is already quite warm, whereas the Jaguar, and that's going to be one of the most sort of defining features of it, is it's a very high-end sort of treble-y guitar. These pickups themselves have been described as kind of spiky, really in your face, really, really quite cool to be fair. They are just, they've got their own sort of vibe to them, but within that as well, it maybe makes the Jaguar a little bit less versatile when it comes to maybe some other types of music. For sure, when I get a Jaguar in my lap, I mean, I'm so accustomed to sticking on some chorus and compression and just... just Johnny Marr riffs for days with this kind of guitar, because it just has that like kind of floaty, sort of spiky sort of sound to it, which I think a lot of people either love or hate. Now, you've noticed me touching these controls here. We've already established that the button up here does exactly the same as the Jazzmaster. When it's down, you're controlled all by here, and when it's up, you're onto your rollers there as well. And actually, I think that little bit of chrome on the Jaguar really kind of helps it stand out too. It's just the Jazzmaster's got obviously the all one pick guard, whereas the Jaguar has got these cuts in it, which just a little touch. I think it just looks really, really cool. But we're looking into the controls here, and now this isn't across the board with Jaguars as well. You'll notice that this is a Squier. This is a classic vibe, showing that you can get these guitars in a lot of other kind of price points as well, and they all do have the key features across them. But you will find there are some Jaguars, for example, the Fender Player series has just got a three-way selector switch. It takes away a lot of these additional switching systems here. So if we're talking about the one down the bottom here, you've got three switches to choose from. Now what these are essentially on-off switches for your pickups. You may be asking yourself, Kieran, there's three of them there. There's only two pickups. Well, the third one does do something quite unique, but you'll hear here that no sound. My volume's up, my switch is down there, all these switches are down, no volume in there. What you do to bring them in is actually flick them up. I'll switch my chorus off as well, so I'm not completely in Johnny Marr mode for this. But the middle switch here, if you flick that up, that's you on your bridge pickup. And if you put both of them up at the same time, that's how you activate both of the pickups too. So quite a unique sound even just from those three options there. But the third switch on the control panel here, it's a filter switch. It's going to cut off some of those low end frequencies if you really, really want to get into that super sort of trebly sound with the Jaguar. I'm going to stick on a bit of reverb for this as well, because I'm going to play just something that's really going to highlight what that sound is. So I'll flick between both pickups and show you what the filter switch is doing. So we'll start on our bridge here. So much in the same way that your rhythm circuit will give you a much, much warmer sound, by initiating the filter switch there, you are going to get a much, much kind of treblier sound, which may be useful to some, may not be useful to others. I've mentioned Johnny Marr quite a few times while talking about the Jaguar as well, but you can certainly hear that specifically in a lot of obviously his newer stuff, and kind of almost like in between sort of the Smiths and his solo project when he started using the Jaguar quite prominently, that gets used through certain pits, especially if you do want just a slightly different sort of sound to that. Now, the other most obvious thing about the Jaguar is that it's actually a short scale guitar, meaning that the distance from the bridge to the nut here is a little bit shorter than a Jazzmaster. What that'll do is it will mean that your string tension is just that little bit looser, especially if you're with a set of 9s or 10s or anything. You'll find that a lot of guitarists will maybe go up to a set of 11s on a Jaguar because it will feel like a set of 10s. So don't worry about, bleeding fingers or anything like that, because it won't feel as, high tension, say if you were to put them on a Strat without setting it up or anything like that. And even at that, if you do have the thinner strings on them, you are able to bend like quite high with this. So if that's something that you need, then that's something you can do. But certainly for anybody who's maybe, not as tall or wants a slightly smaller guitar, then a Jaguar is absolutely superb for that. My, Pro's certainly quite unique sounding, that slightly smaller sort of size to it as well. And personally, as I mentioned, I just think the Jaguar kind of looks a bit cooler because of the chrome nature of it. You can let me know in the comments if you agree with that. But certainly some of the cons that I would definitely say to folk, much like yourself, if you're still with this video right now, is that the sounds can be quite specific and it's maybe not as versatile with, if you do want a much kind of thicker sound, or you maybe want, for a Jaguar for like pan muting and stuff like that, is maybe not the most, it's not going to sound like a Les Paul, certainly, but it's also not going to sound like any other Fender, like a Telecaster or Stratocaster or anything like that. But if you are into, obviously, the kind of more picky sort of style of thing, or you just even want, because I didn't even really demonstrate the Jaguar with a bit of distortion on it as well, because it does sound awesome, especially if you're into that like really, really jaggy sort of, I said jaggy quite a bit in here for the sort of sound of it, but I think it's really what kind of shows it. So if I turn my distortions on, and you'll get that kind of buzz again that you would expect, much like the Jazzmaster on it, but I'll even play just some scrappy riffs with this. So moving on to our last guitar, and the one that I've already touched on a few of the features with it, so I won't need to spend too much time with it. But this is a Ventero 270s Mustang. Now there's, again, much of the muchness. There's a lot of different styles of Mustang that you can get, so it doesn't need to be this particular model. There's Squier ones, there's higher American style Fender ones and stuff like that. I've even seen occasional custom shop Mustangs coming out of the custom shop. And actually Signature models, a very famous Kurt Cobain one. But anyway, I digress. If we're looking at the Mustang, maybe the most obvious thing you'll notice, not only is it a different shape, but it is considerably smaller than the two guitars that I was just playing. It doesn't have the slightly bigger bit there. And certainly the horns themselves don't go as far up there. It does feel like a small guitar. And that's one of the kind of important things that I think with the Mustang. It has a short scale, much the same as the Jaguar, so the distance from your bridge to your nut there is going to be a lot shorter. So all this stuff that I said about thicker strings on there, higher bends, maybe it's slightly easier to play, this is going to apply to a Mustang. Now, kind of similar to the Jaguar as well, it's got two single coil pickups on there, but the way that you control these is kind of similar, but it's kind of different. And let me get into that and really explain it to you. So if you thought the Jaguar was confusing with its switching system, then this is maybe going to be a little extra confusing, but don't worry, I'm here to explain everything for you. You'll notice that there is, there's no traditional pickup selector on here. If we put our attention up to these little sliders here, this is what you're going to be using with a classic Mustang. That I really should deface that quite clearly, because you can get something like a Duosonic, which is exactly the same sort of shape as this. It feels the same, but it has a three-way selector on it. It's much, much more simple to get your head around, and it doesn't allow for, because to kind of spoiler alert, a little bit of sort of cons with this guitar is that in a clutch situation live, it's a little bit more fiddly to use these, especially if you need to change the pickup sound. I'm speaking from experience with that. I used to have a Mustang. It was the Kurt Cobain in utero one, which I think looks awesome. But to try and flick those sounds live, I did find myself kind of getting a bit muddled sometimes. So to explain what these are doing, each one of these sliders have got 3 positions, and they relate to each pickup. So this one here is for our neck, this one here is for our bridge. When they're both in the middle and the volume's up and everything, much the same as the Jaguar, there's no sound. These are your off positions when you are in the center. Now when you flick it to the outside or the inside, depending on how you want to categorize that, that's going to determine what sound you're going to get. So if we're on our bridge position here, that is the 3 positions of the bridge single coil there. On both of those outside positions, just when you're initiating the one pickup, you're going to get the same sound on both. And it applies to the neck single coil as well. But where things start to get a little bit more interesting and certainly allow you to create some much more unique sounds out of it is when you start actually incorporating the 2 pickup sliders together. So you can realistically, let's put that slider down to the bottom there, let's put the other slider down to the bottom, or actually let's hear just the bridge by itself. You're able to get these quite cool sounds that are very unique to a Mustang. I think the combination of the short scale nature, the voicings of those pickups, and some of the sounds that you can get allow you to get a lot of sounds that other guitars can't do, just because of the way that you can wire these together, because I showed you that position there. But what you can do as well is you can have the bridge and the neck facing in towards each other, which will actually give you an out of phase sort of sound. So even let's hear just the neck, and then I'll initiate that to turn it out of phase. You can also get another out of phase sound as well by actually putting both of the sliders to the outside there. Now those out of phase sounds aren't the only things that you can get with it as well, because you can have them both facing upwards or both facing downwards as well. Now, you may not use all of the sounds that are available in a Mustang, but kind of the, you know, very similar to the other Offset family members there. Just having those sounds built into your guitar, it's really, really good maybe for like studio use, or just if you want just a kind of slightly different texture on stuff, because, you know, if we're even putting on a bit of drive again with this here, it might be quite reminiscent of a band maybe like Idols or something like that, because they use kind of like these really, you know, I think the guitarist, I can't remember his name, you can let me know in the comments, the guy with the longer hair, he uses a kind of duosonic Mustang style guitar, actually with only a bridge pickup as well. So that sort of like aggressive single coil sound you're going to get. But then obviously with the other phase and out of phase options as well, it just gives you just much, much more flexibility. So let's turn on a little bit of distortion just now and get a bit crazy with this. Kind of taken inspiration from the Jaguar in the fact that all the sounds are very, very specific to this guitar. So you're maybe not going to get, you know, you're not going to kind of be confused that you're playing something else if anybody knows you are playing a Mustang. Now, one of the things that I do just want to touch on just before we wrap up this video, and it's, again, it's just kind of a slight more con side of this guitar, and that is the bridge that comes on this. Now, this is an actual kind of, you wouldn't even so much call it a floating bridge, but it is a trem bridge in itself, but it's almost just this like bar that rocks back and forward. And certainly if you do plan on using this quite a bit, maybe have your tuner at hand as well, just because it can kind of knock out the sound of your guitar and your tuning. It's actually quite a good feeling trem, to be fair, but yeah, a couple of those have kind of been knocked out there. So you might find a lot of people maybe don't use it, and certainly I personally probably wouldn't use it as well, but hey, that's not to say that you won't find use out of it, and certainly all the examples that I've shown with the guitars today, there's no set rules for them. You know, if you do want to play metal on a Jazzmaster, you can do that. If you want to play, you know, jazz on a Jaguar or something like that, you can do that. They're more kind of like, play to their strengths is one thing I would recommend to people who maybe don't know exactly what they are. And again, hopefully this video has maybe steered you in the right direction if you are thinking about an Offset. It is a really cool world to kind of step into, and each of those guitars have got their own unique qualities to them that really makes them stand out, especially from their counterpart Fenders. And I mean, if we're really going to boil down to it, I think they're just some of the coolest looking guitars that Fender do. But hopefully this video has helped you. You can let us know in the comments if you've got yourself an Offset, you know, off the back of this, or even if you are already a convert to the Offset guitars. We'd love to know what you're playing down in the comments below. And if you have liked the video at all, a like and a subscribe would go a long way if you want to keep tabs on our new content coming out there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought because I just want to go play these with big distortion and lots of reverb, specifically that Jazzmaster there. But until next time, I've been Kieran, and this has been a guide to the 3 most popular Fender Offset guitars. Have a great day.